Here at the Canadian Club, we have always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas and inform the most relevant and compelling conversations of our time.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I hope that you all enjoyed your meals. Certainly, judging from the conversation, you had a chance to reconnect with old friends and make some new ones as well. My name is Joseph Lowe, President of Canadian Club Toronto, and I'm delighted to be your host today. Special appreciation to those of you joining us online, thanks to the AV services of Van Valkenburg Communications and livemeeting.ca. I'd also like to thank our season sponsor, Canadian Bankers Association, for their support throughout our 125th season. I'd also like to acknowledge Canada's Forest Trust, an ESG company planting smart forests to take positive action on climate change. This partnership is reducing the carbon footprint of our entire season of Canadian Club Toronto events. Lastly, we welcome students here today from U of T's Political Science program and TMU's The Dais, thanks to Simon Dwyer from Bell Canada. A wonderful coincidence is that this year, the Canadian Club Toronto is also celebrating its 125th anniversary, along with the Yukon's 125th anniversary of joining Confederation. Now, what would you like to know about the Premier's leadership journey and his plans for the Yukon moving forward? Please use the Q&A cards that you'll find at your tables. Just scribble on them old school style and we'll get them to our moderator for discussion. And for those of you joining us online, hit the submit a question button as always and we'll get your questions that way as well. And now to our special guests of the day. Premier Ranj Pillai was first elected to the Yukon Legislative Assembly in 2016 and was appointed Deputy Premier, Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, Minister of Economic Development, and Minister responsible for the Yukon Development Corporation and Yukon Energy Corporation. In January, he became the Yukon's 10th Premier. In addition to his duties as the territory's Chief Executive, he currently serves as Minister of the Executive Council Office, Minister of Economic Development, and Minister responsible for Yukon Housing Corporation as well. During his time in office, the Premier has worked hard to advance a strong and diverse Yukon economy. For his efforts, he was the recipient of the North Startup Canada 2019 Regional Award for Entrepreneur Promotion. Premier Pillai is a trusted decision maker and tireless community advocate who has contributed to numerous Yukon businesses, governments, schools, as well as not-for-profits. Moderating our discussion this afternoon is the Honourable Lisa Raitt. Lisa has an impressive political record of her own in federal politics, serving in 3 different ministerial portfolios. Since 2020, she has served as Vice Chair, Global Investment Banking, CIBC Capital Markets. And prior to joining CIBC, she was President and CEO of the Toronto Port Authority. Premier Pillai, Ms. Raitt, I am pleased to present you the Canadian Club of Toronto podium.
Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate the introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So just, I appreciate you being directed to the Q&A on the table. Fun fact, didn't bring my reading glasses today, so scribbling does not cut it for me. You need to print so I can actually read the questions, and I'm sure that you have some really good questions for the Premier out there. Premier, welcome to Toronto.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming here. I'm going to start off with a really hard-hitting question. You ready?
I'm ready.
Are you a Leafs fan? And if you are not, explain why.
That's a tough one. I think there's only one answer while I'm here. I'm a Leafs fan. We have a meeting later on this afternoon with your Premier, and we'll have some announcements out of that and some work that Premier Ford and I have been doing together. And I know I better be supporting the Leafs going into that meeting. Yeah, definitely. I could be in trouble if not.
Well, you're wearing the right color.
Yes.
So it's good.
Yes.
You're off
yes.
to a good start.
Yes.
So, and we get very excited when we win games as Leafs fans.
Yeah, you know what?
Excited.
We're nearby. I'm sure things will be hectic down the street at some point this evening.
So, Premier, there's a lot of folks in the room who may not know the history of Yukon.
Yeah.
From an economics point of view, from an economic development point of view. They know that at some point in time, the Canadian map showed Yukon and we had to memorize all the provinces and territories. But
yeah, we did.
Why don't you give us a thumbnail sketch, if you can, of the last 125 years? A small task,
Small task, yeah, I'll have to remember that social studies class. No, I do want to, just before we start, I want to thank the Canadian Club for giving me an opportunity to come. Thank you. I've always looked up to you. Fun fact for us, you've contributed greatly to Ontario and into this country. I have been in the Yukon for almost 25 years, but our parents are both from Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, so there's a bit of connection. We just never really had a chance to spend a lot of time together. So thank you for spending the time today.
And we think that my aunt bought your aunt's house in Glencoe Mills, Cape Breton.
We just figured that out, actually.
That's how tribal we are.
You go back to the years of old 1800s. My Aunt Margaret, who taught me how to swear in Gaelic, and her husband, who was a miller, built that house and that farm. So again, thank you for having me today. There's a few just quick things. I think MPP Robin Martin, I think, is in the room. Hi, thank you for being here today. There's some students from the Toronto Metropolitan University and University of Toronto. Thank you for coming and listening to our talk today. And again, friends from Connected North, great folks that are doing incredible work with Yukon CIBC, our banker, of course, Doug, thank you for all that you do. Agnico Eagle, who we want to spend more time and money in the Yukon, Canada Goose, who's here. And again, for those tuning in from the Yukon, thank you for spending some time with us today. Quick 125-year sketch. Well, of course, the history of the Yukon, when we think about it, it goes, back to millennia. And we've had incredible stories passed on from our First Nations communities for thousands of years. I think about, I'll give you a quick snapshot. I want to say this in a very respectful manner when you're sharing a story, but my children, if we want to think about the Yukon, my sons, there was a long ago person that was found in the Yukon a long time ago, and they did testing to see in our First Nation communities if there's family connections, and I think the time period was about 400 years outside of Haines Junction in different areas where that individual had been trekking, and people in our community are directly connected to that individual now. So that's when we think about history, and I think it's been covered in different documentaries, but I want to be very respectful. I'll reflect on that story, not get into telling more about it. Of course, we go back to 125 years ago, we were talking about the gold rush, and that really, folks coming, one of the most educated workforces in the history of this country, coming from San Francisco, Seattle, Vancouver, Dawson City, 30,000 people, electrified, opera singers, beautiful theaters, a wild time, and also impact to the communities and the people who live there, which we have to reflect on. So we're rolling into, of course, it was an incredible anniversary. It's going to be June 13th this year. It's the 125th anniversary of the Yukon joining Confederation. The contributions from the Yukon have always been incredible, whether it is the amount of people who signed up to fight with Canada in World War I or World War II. Great stories of teams packing up and financed at a Dawson City Gold to come and play for the Stanley Cup in Ottawa at one point as well. So very storied, amazing history with lots of entrepreneurs, and mining had always been an important part of the story. It's an important part of the story now. We'll probably touch on that, but we're quite proud. So when we look back at those 125 years, we've learned lots, and it's a great part of Canadian history. But now what we're thinking about is what's the next 125 years look like? And where are we at in this country geopolitically? What does this look like? What does the Arctic mean? What does Northern policy mean? What does Arctic security mean? And what have we learned? And I think this year, the other big anniversary for us is it's the 50th anniversary of something called Here Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And it's an incredible, timeless document that was pulled together where First Nations leaders in the Yukon went to their communities. They consulted with their members and said, what do we want for our children? And they came together and they traveled to Ottawa and they sat down, and it was the beginning of modern treaties in the country. And they sat down and said, this is what we want. We want to be part of growth. We want to be partners in this journey. We think there's areas where we would like to have certain governance rights. We want the opportunity to build some of our own legislation, but we want to be part of what's being built here. And that, the 50th anniversary, we just celebrated. And that's really the foundation for us around reconciliation and how we think about reconciliation.
Yeah. So, but Yukon has its own agreements with the Canadian federal government. You've gone through what's called devolution.
We do, and I mean, for us, as the two bigger pieces were devolution, and even probably during your time in federal office, you would have seen some of the powers being devolved to the territory. So over the last number of years, really in the last 20 years, some of the bigger powers have devolved. So very similar to a province, of course, and that work has been underway. So we've had two major things happening in parallel. The territory taking on those powers from the federal government on our lands and resources, and our, at the same time, First Nations governments, 11 of the 14 First Nations in the Yukon taking on extensive powers and growth, and really doing incredible things, whether it be in business or in the governance structures that they have in place.
Yeah, and I appreciate you start the next 125 years putting reconciliation right in the front window.
Yeah.
And that's what your experience is in. That's when you first came to Yukon, you were working in reconciliation.
Yeah, a number of things. I had an opportunity on my last position before going into politics to work with a First Nation called Champagne and Ajax First Nation. I worked next to Chief Steve Smith. His dad was the person who actually brought the document Here Today for Our Children Tomorrow to Ottawa, and I've learned a lot from him. And we really learned the importance of working together in partnership. The government, previous Premier Silver, and I've carried on the role. We meet quarterly with all First Nation leaders. We walk into a large room and it is face to face, and all First Nation leaders are there, and all of our ministers and our cabinet is there. And then we have almost 20 different working groups that focus on areas of priority in policy development. You have to be at the table in that way. Mm-hmm. The other thing we changed, and you would remember when you were in office, you'd have provinces or territories, and there'd be a week where they'd come to Ottawa and meet with you.
Yeah, we usually hid.
You hid, exactly. They were coming for staff.
We were a conservative government.
That's right. There was lots of asks on the way.
Lots of asks.
Lots of asks. So for us, we started a different process. We met with First Nation leaders and said, let's do that together. No province or territory had ever done that. So we came together and said, let's figure out our priorities, whether it's infrastructure, health spend, education, the different areas that we would look at. And we've done that since 2016. We've done that trip together. So we spend that time on the Hill where you've got First Nations leaders in the room with us. And really, it's the right thing to do, but also it built a foundation that we needed for economic growth. I mean, we were in a recession in 2015, just before we took office. And since then, it's brought certainty for investment. It's brought certainty in many ways to the territory. And it's helped in so many ways.
Absolutely. So tell me this, is critical minerals the new gold rush?
Yeah, it is. I think I'm looking back at, one of our CEOs, Stu, great to see you, and who's been on a critical mineral project for a number of years. We've known that this is important for a long time. We've been focused on this for, at least in my time. I was Energy Mines Minister, over the last half a decade, and we were focused. We knew what was going to happen with copper demand. We knew what was going to play out with zinc. We saw that. We knew that the transition. So it's good that the federal government is saying this is really important. We felt it was important for a long time. We believe in supporting responsible mining and balancing that with supporting the protection of our environment. We think it's we did a climate change plan that was tabled a number of years ago. And critical minerals was in that plan before we have, a little bit ahead of what we're hearing coming in the federal government. So yes, it is extremely important. I think we have 25 of the 31 critical minerals that are in the Yukon. We have a number of major mining companies. Some of the folks in the Fraser Institute are here today. They've been tracking us very positively, and I spent the morning meeting with others yesterday and today that are investing in that sector, and it will be extremely important for this country. We have to get it right. We have an opportunity for growth, and we need to embrace it and understand that mining is moving towards a much more modern use of talent in the country and how it treats the environment.
Yeah. And in order to be successful, you have to have roads and you have to have electricity to the mine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the transport side of it.
Sure.
I read with great interest your plan to work with the United States on the building of a port in Skagway.
Yeah, we have a lot of really significant infrastructure projects underway. So for those that are thinking about the Yukon and want to invest, the big ones I would say, and these are all going on right now, we've got about $250 million going into our international airport. We have a direct from Europe seasonally from Frankfurt, and we have an airline called Yukon's airline and called Air North, and they are also flying into Toronto right now and Ottawa seasonally. Great local company that employs lots of folks. So infrastructure enhancement in the airport. We have about $400 million identified through partnerships with the private sector and the federal government to upgrade our road systems. I think we have about 5,000 kilometers of all-season roads, and there's a big investment going into different areas where we are trying to unlock critical minerals, and we're also trying to improve our roads. Skagway is this really interesting project. What a lot of people don't know in Canada, when you come to the Yukon, you fly to Whitehorse, you're only an hour and 20 minutes away from Alaska. You just go over this mountain pass. It's a beautiful, beautiful community. There's a tiny little community there. It's about 600-700 people. It gets 1.2 to 1.4 million visitors. It's like 4 streets over the summer in cruise ship traffic. And it's called Skagway, Alaska. And there's a port there. And we are in the midst of upgrading the ore terminal. So the community has taken it back. It's really important. I mean, this is where the rubber hits the road on policy. We have this bilateral agreement between Canada and the US. We're all talking about critical minerals. But if you can't get critical minerals to Tidewater, then what do you do? And it's not feasible to drive it all the way from the north. So we're just about to sign off the final details on a term sheet, and then we are going in to rebuild, or finance the rebuilding of this ore terminal, which will unlock sort of northwestern Canada's critical minerals. So our team's been on that for 2 years. We're looking at different technology of how we're going to move ore. But again, really interesting project. At the same time, we're building a 777-kilometer fiber line from essentially Whitehorse all the way to the Arctic. And it's a wild project. It goes over 1,100 water crossings, and it's almost built. We have about another year. So we worked on that. Minister Baines at the time, one of your colleagues, we negotiated that agreement to do the funding in place, and we're building that out, and we're doing it in partnership with Bell Canada. So that's almost completed, and that will give redundancy. People don't know this. There's not true redundancy to the north of this country, to the Arctic. So we're actually going to be giving the opportunity for Nunavut and other areas to have redundancy, and that gives another bunch of opportunities when it comes to tech and diversification. So lots of different projects right now underway when it comes to infrastructure spend in the Yukon.
Yeah, and while you're here in Toronto, I assume that you're you're talking to people in the financial sector about the opportunities in Yukon and perhaps even the ESG applicability?
Yeah, we've got, the big one we haven't launched yet is a grid connection to southern Canada. And so we were meeting with our banker yesterday, and we're looking at the investment firm. So we believe that the right thing to do is to build an electrical grid connection from northern British Columbia to the Yukon. We looked at it in 2018. There wasn't a lot of interest really from BC Hydro at that point. We need that built. I mean, there's other things that'll happen. There's small modular, we know that. There's different places for opportunity. But when you're thinking about ESG financing, you want stability, you want a clean energy source, you want good governance when it comes to relations with First Nation governments and the impacts to your communities, that there's positive impacts. And when we think about all those things and, under, of course, paramount environment, we think this is important. So how do we do that? We're going to, the model inevitably will be in partnership with First Nation governments, whether that's from an equity position or it's going to be some, forms of debt. And, we're talking over $2 billion of a project that will be built. But we think it's, that we want the federal government and we want Canadians to understand that nation building projects, this country still needs them. We still need them. And that is what's going to make the dramatic difference about Arctic security, northern policy, and how we stay competitive at a global level. And so we're in Ottawa for the next couple of days, flying out tomorrow, and we will be having discussions again at the federal level to say whether it's the role for the infrastructure bank, but we need that imagination in our country. We need that, and we need to push to still build things the way we used to.
Yeah. On critical minerals, you mentioned how many of the critical minerals listed in Canada and the United States that you possess in Yukon. You must have attracted the attention of the Department of Defense in the United States, and they must have an interest in what's happening in Yukon. Aside from Arctic sovereignty and defense, have they expressed an interest? Are they curious about what's available in Yukon and how they can bring it down to the U.S.?
Play a role, yeah. My takeaways in that conversation, some Canadians don't know this, but the U.S. has inventoried all of our critical minerals in Canada and put it on their list. Yeah. So first of all, that's an interesting undertaking. So when I'm sitting with the Ambassador Cohen, I'm going, it would be really nice if we could get access to Tidewater in America. Since you've already inventoried all of our critical minerals, you might want us to be able to, add some value to them by shipping them. So that's the first piece. I think there's a real connectivity between both countries in the inventory list. The second part of that would be we have to understand how we are going to bring certain things to market. So yes, it's been done between the private sector and the DOD and Department of Defense. One of the things that come to mind for us is tungsten. Yeah. So we have a big, significant tungsten deposit, but the tungsten market, what has happened, as I understand it, it would get flooded by particular countries that are not our allies at this moment, and then projects would, they wouldn't be feasible. So there has to be some level of intervention at some point from Canada and the US to understand how can we still extract these particular minerals. We need them, and I don't know if just a standard market will be able to bolster that sort of work, so we have to keep an eye on that. But yes, there is significant opportunities when it comes to that.
Let's pivot then to Arctic sovereignty and national defense. So you may have had a balloon fly over your territory that the Americans shot down on our behalf.
Yeah.
How much fun was that?
Day 5 on the job, so it was interesting. I chaired Lisa. We did it. We met with Department of Defense on Thursday, and we did a conversation with the Globe and Mail on Thursday afternoon. And I've always, in part of our, my team has always been concerned about the North. We've been concerned about the opening of shipping routes. Yeah. When I look at how long it takes to build big projects in the country, and you think, if that is going to be a significant shipping route 25 years from now, we need to start now. When you think about planning, consultation, environmental assessment, multiple levels of environmental assessment, and then building something in the most challenging places in the world, those conversations have to happen now if we're going to be ready 20 years from now. We have to. So we were chatting with the Globe about it, and I said I'm concerned, and I think we need to be focused, and we have to understand what the Department of Defense, how they're going to spend their dollars. Yeah. And to be open with you, I walked away from the interview thinking people are going to think I'm really, maybe I'm a bit paranoid about this and my thoughts. That was Thursday. And then Friday, I was picking luggage up in YVR in Vancouver, and the phone rang, and it was something just got shot down. And then by the next day, we were gathering folks together, and there was, deployment of Canadian forces. And they're still trying to define, I'll leave it at that, what it played out. But what it did give us a sense of how quick we can react, what does it look like, and how important are we going to be as we start to come up with a blueprint and a plan for not just for Northern policy, which is the investments in the North, but also when it comes to Arctic security. So very key.
And we talked a little bit about this at dinner, the opportunity that the Canadian forces have to do real cold training in your part of the world. Yeah, I mean, I'm meeting with Minister Anand this week, and this is something that we think there has to be more training. We have Canadian Rangers that are amazing community members and leaders that do work, but we need to be in a position where Canada is, coming and training in Canada and in the winter. There's a really interesting conversation that's happening now, which is cultural diplomacy, and we hosted an arts event, the Arctic Arts Summit. It's the first time I was hosting Canada last June. 400 people from across the circumpolar world, and I met with all Nordic ambassadors. I mean, they're of course they're prepped, they're ready, and they want to partner with Canada, and we want to partner with them, and they're our friends. And there's lots of really strong Indigenous ties across the circumpolar world, and there's connectivity culturally, educationally that's happening, and now we have to do it in a bigger way in Canada. So that's something we're focused on. We know there's going to be a lot of infrastructure built out. We want to be part of the planning. We want to make sure there's benefit for our communities, there's benefit for our First Nation corporations, very similar to what happens in the US, in Alaska. So it's an interesting time. Yeah. I'm going to remind you, you have question and answer cards on the table if you have a question that you'd like to be answered by the Premier. We'd be more than happy for you to print clearly and legibly your question on the card so that I can read it. Before we get to those questions though, Premier, I'm going to ask you, at the end of the day, all politics is local. Yeah. You're the Premier of Yukon, and you have to look after your constituents. Yeah. So you did something very unique recently in the space of sick leave. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you did in private sector sick leave? Sure. Well, we moved quickly during COVID. I was here. I was in this room March 2020. We were here for the big mining conference, PDAC. And we flew home, and we quickly had to figure out what to do. And our team of, I've worked very closely. My Deputy Minister of Economic Development is here. We worked very closely. We had a small, agile team, and we moved really quickly. What I mean by that is 10 days after we knew what was happening, we moved into building programs. We essentially capitalized them, built them. We knew there'd be risk. Governments don't do this, and we rolled them out. And so we paid fixed costs for private sector, took the risk, paid it, and that gave us really significant tailwinds going into the time we're in now. We also did sick leave, and we did it. We were the first in the country. It's always nice when big provinces like Ontario or Manitoba or BC calls you and said, hey, can we get the blueprints for your programs? So we had rolled that out, and it was coming to an end in the spring, and I sat down with our team, and we did some analysis, and we thought, look, the private sector is still under a tremendous amount of pressure. They're dealing with inflation. They're dealing with coming back from the challenges of the last number of years. So we just launched this week a paid sick leave program. We took the private sector average wage, and we looked at what folks are most impacted in that lower wage range, primarily folks from more vulnerable backgrounds, women, and we as well. And so we've now launched a government-funded sick leave program. It covers a week of sick leave. It can be added on to a private sector's sick leave program they have already, but it's going to be completely government-funded for the private sector, though. So it's the first of its kind in Canada. In other provinces and territories, what you're seeing is it's being put, the governments are mandating the private sector to do it, and we felt it was something that could make it'll help with retention, recruitment in a tight labor market. And it's well received so far, and we'll be analyzing that over the next couple of years. Okay, great. Good. We're on to audience questions now, and they really did print legibly, so I'm very, very grateful to all of you. I don't even have to go like that. How are you? I know from experience, because I have a nephew who lives up in Yukon.
Sure.
There's issues with housing. There's issues
Yeah,
with housing
yeah.
all across the
Yeah.
country. Why don't you, especially though in Yukon,
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit about the housing crisis and perhaps what you think is a solution for Yukon?
Well, a lot of strategies needed. A strategy with lots of different tools. It is a challenge. We've had, in the last 5 years, we had 12.1% growth. That led all provinces, territories, states in the G7. There's areas like Halifax, I think, has had big growth in different areas, but we've had extensive growth. Yes, there's only 44,000 folks, but it's growth, and it's percentage-wise, it's led the country. So we need to have, our challenge is this. We need to have lots out so people can build. Building costs are expensive. We need more densification, but we need patient money. That's what I think is the biggest key. Our First Nation governments are really starting to play in the space of land development, and that's going to make a difference. But part of, I guess my teaser for today is part of what we're doing this afternoon is meeting with the government of Ontario, but we need more patient dollars. We need people that want to build. The demand's there. It's a blue chip investment. I mean, it's just like the population continues to grow, and we're in a position where we need market rental. It's not about, we need affordable options, but that will come as we see a bigger portfolio of choices for folks. So right now it's been tight. Like we're at 1% vacancy. Really, it's expensive to build, and we've had really strong growth. So that I've kept that portfolio, which you might say as a political advisor, you shouldn't have done that, but probably the only person. But I kept the portfolio because I knew it needed the focus of the Premier's office to get it right. And so we've kept that along with economic development because it is it's our biggest, policy challenge, I would say.
And the two go together.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to have economic growth
No.
unless you have housing alternatives for people.
Yeah.
That's it.
And
From a Conservative, will there be an early election in the Yukon? I assume it's a Conservative looking for another.
maybe. I don't know. I want to. I think right now we've gone through 2 years. It's been really difficult, and I think that folks always, we as a politician are going to say, I don't think somebody wants an election. There's probably lots of people that say, maybe there is. We don't agree with you.
Yeah.
But at this point, I've been focused on stability. I've been focused on thinking about, getting things done that we need to deal with. Housing, supporting healthcare, getting education right. Those are the things that I've wanted to focus on. We're doing well on a number of the files. We still have work to do in other parts of the file. And I think, we have an agreement in place right now with the NDP, similar to what happened at the federal level. We actually did an agreement before the federal government had done something similar. I try to cast politics aside. I'm going to work for everybody, and work for Yukoners, really. And I love working across party lines. So in that sense, I think we've been really good things we've been able to do. We rolled out a dental plan before the federal government. We rolled out an early child care program before the federal government. And some of those things we've been able to do in concert with the opposition. So right now, the question would be, I think I'm happy with the direction we're going, but never say never.
What role can the mining sector play in Indigenous reconciliation?
Well, if you look at all the things that are needed in this country, in all of our communities, from a standpoint of infrastructure and our First Nation communities, I don't think that any government, federal, provincial, municipal, will come and fill that gap on their own. It is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We think about the cost associated with filling up decades of underspending in First Nations communities and Indigenous communities, and it's not going to play out. We're not going to meet those education, housing needs, water in some communities. But if public-private partnerships come together and the private sector works in this country and can find that balance in agreement with Indigenous governments, and our federal and provincial governments also play a role, we can get to where we need to go. But not any one entity or two entities will get there. So what I've said to our First Nation communities, private sector is necessary. It's absolutely necessary. It's necessary.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Somebody wants to know if you own an electric vehicle.
I don't. I haven't bought an electric vehicle yet.
Can you use them in Whitehorse?
Yeah, we have a aggressive plan
Great.
for folks to use them. Lots of charging stations. As Energy Minister, we put lots in place. People really find the range works well for them. No, I drive a pickup. I use it for going hunting. I use it for going out to different areas that I travel to, and I think I'm watching to see what happens with electric trucks as well.
Yeah, very good. So kind of two questions combined into one. You're looking for the private sector to help solve some of your territorial challenges. What are the toughest ones? And then the second part of this is, what benefits are there for potential investment opportunities for people outside the region? Sure. So they're going to come and help you, but what's in it for them? Yeah,
housing's double-ended. So housing, big challenge, big opportunity. We have great developers, we have great builders. I want to match them with, investment money from Ontario and other parts of Canada, and I think that mixed together can come up with great solutions. That would be one. So there's great return on investments in the real estate market. There's been folks that have been based out of Vancouver and Calgary that have seen this secret for a long time and have gone in, I think, have done very, very well in the Yukon, and I think there's lots of opportunity and space for others to play a role. I would say that, there's other challenges, of course. I mean, we're in our country, we're still reeling from things that have happened, like residential school. Those that the Yukon, there's lots of folks that deal with the trauma of that, just like everywhere across this country. That's still a reality. I don't think there's a private sector piece for that, but I want to be, open with the room. These are challenges that we all have to understand and get to better educate ourselves on. I think healthcare is going to be, when I think about that, we are looking at how do we look at identification of foreign credential. I have lots of registered nurses from India that we're trying to make sure we have bridging programs for. We have a huge Filipino population in the Yukon, and we're trying to make sure that we do bridging there. And I think there's opportunities, I wouldn't say on the private side, but there's opportunities for post-secondary institutions to play a role in partnering with us. When it comes to renewable energy, most of our communities, we went out in a very short period of time, and we looked at what was happening we looked at what happened in Ontario. We looked at the pricing models. So what we did was we took a pricing model and said, okay, let's put the price of renewable energy at the same price that you'd pay for diesel, LNG. So all we're going to do is displace. And we made that feasible. We offset the CapEx for projects. We put in a regulatory process where we could buy energy, independent power production, and now most of our communities are either doing solar, wind, you name it, and then they're feeding into our grid. We're also doing some interesting things like grid scale battery and other pieces like that. So there is opportunity for renewable energy, and there's opportunity to come in and invest, and we have a good pricing model, and we have a feasible approach to it. So there's a few things that I think. Tourism, building out bigger assets. Our tourism contribution, when we think about GDP, we are number one, number two in the country from the sector. So we're going to hopefully see a good bounce back this year coming out of what has just played out. But I mean, with the lowest unemployment rate, 2022, we had the best GDP in the country. We've dropped a bit. We're looking at about 5% projected for this year. We had GDP growth in 20 and 21, one of only two places in the middle of COVID. Retail sales, yeah, there's a small population, but we just crested $1 billion last year. So really, all indicators for us show lots of strength, and again, good tailwinds.
Okay, so low unemployment.
Yeah.
How are you helping encourage immigration to Yukon?
We'll use all of our immigration allotments, which is not a whole bunch, because we're constantly in dialogue with the federal government to have more opportunities. We had our allotment, we were made aware of it in February, and we'll fill it in 60 more days. So it's a very multicultural community now, people from all over the world choosing to make the Yukon their home. So we're constantly knocking on the door. I'll be meeting with Minister Fraser this week saying, I need more spots. But we're also trying to be smart about it. We have to think about where's the diasporas come from Is there Filipino communities? Is there communities for people from India? Where are France? Because right now we have to be in a position where those individuals that are moving, they need to have family structures and support systems, because they can come and live with family members. If everybody that's going to come wants a brand new apartment or house, it's just going to exacerbate the challenges we have for housing. So we have to be very strategic. So we have to continue to support the labor market. We have the second best numbers when you take into consideration participation off our workforce, or off our population into the workforce. So everybody's working, but we still need lots more folks to work. And I think we're still signaling to the federal government that we need some level of more flexible temporary working opportunities. It'll be important for critical minerals in this country, because we don't have enough people to go out and do the exploration, and we need people from other countries to do that. And they don't necessarily want to be in Canada. They're okay with making Canadian dollars and bringing it back and investing it in their own homes. And the tourism sector is going to need it. We need it, whether it's in Whistler or probably Northern Ontario. I'm sure there's challenges with labor from Halifax to Muskoka to Vancouver to Whitehorse when it comes to this tourism season.
Okay, we're going to do a few shorty.
Sure, let's do
Okay,
it.
here we go.
Okay.
Future of education in Yukon.
Distance learning. We have the first university in the north of Canada. That was something we undertook in 2017. It's important for Canada to have a university in the north. I think we have to have very specialized curriculum development when it comes to that university. We'll be focused on reconciliation, Indigenous governance, climate change, research opportunities with other post-secondary institutions across the country, probably some specialized work around healthcare, and then it'll be partnership. We have to do that. We all know that the old bricks and mortar structure of education everywhere is not going to be the only route. It'll be important. We Connect the North. We're just so much fun. We sat yesterday, and thank you. It was so amazing. So we sat just blocks from here in a studio where people from all over this country that are subject matter experts are delivering to the most remote schools in the north, and a number of schools, almost over 500 lessons this year, anything from, you name it, to visual arts, to yoga, to social studies, to finance. Live classroom delivery. And so our partners are here, and it was just what an incredible opportunity. So I think it's just using the technology and using the lessons we've learned over the last couple of years when it comes to distance learning will be key.
Reputationally, Yukon enjoys a fantastic reputation in high quality healthcare.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can teach us in the rest of Canada?
We have our challenges because of our growth. So we need more access to GPs, and we need, we're working with our nurses and we're working with our doctors, and we have growth. And so we're looking at a whole bunch of different models. We went out and spoke with Yukoners, and we built a plan called Putting People First, which is just not focused on acute, but it's a more holistic approach to delivery. It's about making sure that we decentralize some of the delivery. We make sure that we have nurse practitioners, making sure that we have doctors that were educated in the Yukon, that come from the Yukon. We need Indigenous nurses and doctors that can deliver and understand the communities where they're working better than anyone else. So we have lots to do. We need more, we still have a wait list when it comes to family doctors, but we are aggressively going out, and we will go abroad. We will. For us, I'm going to look at Andrew Furey, Premier Furey's got a great model right now where they're taking the curriculum core competencies required in Newfoundland, and they're going to India and working with universities so that you hit all your regulatory qualifications when you come to Canada. Those are things we're looking at. We're going, I think, in September to do some of this work.
And your mom's a nurse, right?
My mom's a nurse, yeah. So lots of advice from my mom.
A Cape Breton mother who's also a nurse, a very dangerous prospect.
Yeah, 40 years a nurse, an incredible nurse, and I get to bounce lots of ideas off of her.
Okay, last question. Thank you very much, everybody. We got through them all, I think. How do you deal with Russia? Small question.
Small question. I think
They're your neighbor.
Can
you see it from your house?
I can't see her. Sarah Palin did grow up in Skagway, Alaska, but I had a call with the Lieutenant Governor of Alaska last week, and we had a great conversation about there's so much Department of Defense infrastructure in Alaska, good for everybody in Canada. a lot of spend, a lot of military bases. What do we need to think about? No, we have to understand that we have, it's not coast to coast, it's coast to coast to coast in this country. And that coast, we need to understand the importance of that. And we have to understand, like I get the politics in the country. You know, there's more seats in, you know, Mississauga and Etobicoke there is, of course, in all the northern parts of Canada when it comes to MPs. And then you get into election cycles and people, it doesn't matter what the political party is, they focus on, okay, we have to win those seats. But I know there's only a few MPs in the north, but it's most of our landmass, 5% of Canada, the Yukon. And this is important for everybody in this room. There's opportunity for growth. It has to be measured, appropriate growth, but we have to make sure that we get the infrastructure that's going into place right. And we look at what's happening in the other parts of the circumpolar world and how much emphasis they've put on the north and the Arctic. And so we need to be able to have the proper communications, the proper electrical grid, the proper view. So if we populate appropriately, we support our Indigenous communities to thrive, we make smart decisions as Canadians, then we don't have to worry about Russia because we're going to be there.
Yeah.
And others that are our friends want to be there with us, doing research and work and proper extraction when it comes to critical minerals, and a whole bunch of different opportunities. So we just got to be there together as Canadians and understand it's a big, big country, but it's important that we're all supporting each other.
Thank you very much, Premier. Everyone?
Great, thank you.
Premier Pillai.
Awesome, thank you.
Premier, on behalf of the Canadian Club Toronto, our members and our guests, I'd like to thank you officially for being on our podium today and sharing your vision for Yukon moving forward. 3 takeaways that I had. Number one, even in your opening kind of remarks, you painted a vivid, a beautiful portrait of the Yukon 125 years ago, but then obviously kind of expanded upon what that view is going to be looking forward, your inspiring vision of reconciliation and prosperity in the next 125 years. We wish you all the best as you continue to lead the Yukon onward and forward, and look forward to welcoming you again back to the Canadian Club Toronto very, very soon. Thank you. And Lisa, to you, thank you again for your expert moderation. Your experience in the affairs of Canada and global affairs certainly shone through today, as always. Thank you so much. And before we finish, members and guests, let me briefly share some of our upcoming events here at the Canadian Club. On Thursday, May 11th, we'll be hosting a private equity panel featuring Fengate, Alfie Capital, and Brookfield. And on Thursday, May 18th, the President and CEO of the Canadian Credit Union Association, Jeff Guthrie, will be at our podium as well. Visit us at canadianclub.org. You'll see more about these events, membership options, as well as ticket options. I wish you all a great afternoon and look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.
Oh, does he?